Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. This episode is part of our special summer series called Leaving Home Stories, in which writers from the Habit membership will read personal narratives on the theme of leaving home, literally or metaphorically, temporarily or permanently. If you leave home and you go far enough, you'll find yourself a stranger in a strange land. You're the one speaking a foreign tongue. Suddenly, your Midwestern English seems exotic to the locals, or the locals don't understand you at all, or you fall back on the international language of love, or something like it. This week we hear from 3 writers who found some part of themselves halfway across the world. Our first story comes from Reagan Dregge, who, by the way, joined the Habit membership on the first day the Habit membership existed in 2019, and has been a vital member of the community every day since. Reagan is a letter writer. Several times a week she pulls out pen and paper. I'm not speaking metaphorically here, a real pen and real paper. She scratches out a letter, she folds it, puts it in a non-metaphorical envelope, attaches a non-metaphorical stamp, and sends it away to a soon-to-be delighted friend. Some of her best friends are pen pals. In the following story, she tells of the time she and some pen pals left behind the American Midwest and its tornadoes for the glamour of Scotland and dinosaur footprints, and how they discovered that glamour is in the eye of the beholder. Here's Reagan Dregge reading Dave and the Dinosaur Disco.
Dave and the Dinosaur Disco by Reagan Dregge. Sarah couldn't sleep. Jet lag, adrenaline, and pregnancy conspired to keep her awake most of the night throughout those 6 short days in the Scottish Highlands. 20 weeks along with her 4th child, she found herself with a sudden hankering for the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. So, in celebration of her 40th birthday, she arranged an adventure and brought 3 girlfriends, a cousin, a college roommate, and me, her pen pal since childhood, and self-appointed travel scribe. That first night, my own non-pregnant body was flailing to adjust. When I walked into the bathroom, Sarah was camping out on a blanket on the floor, surrounded by snacks. Later, she told me about her video call with Nathan and the kids, who were weathering a tornado warning in their Omaha basement. Midnight in Inverness meant 6 p.m. back home, so no wonder she was as wide awake as her 3 bouncy kids. She explained her 4-year-old's current infatuation with basements, and how frequently he asked her whether other houses had them. April in the Midwest is peak tornado season. The rules are straightforward. Leave supper on the table, take shelter, watch the radar, and wait out the storm, which is exactly what the kids had clamored over each other to tell her about while she munched on her stockpile of goldfish. She confessed to me that all the excitement had surprised her with a wave of homesickness. Our first morning on the Isle of Skye began with a very steep and very touristy incline, Old Man's Store. 3 of us jabbered on gaily as we scaled the rocky slope. The 4th, me, was breathless. A young woman carrying a toddler on her back, with 2 young children on either side of her hiking poles, zoomed past us toward the peak that towered above. My muscles and lungs burned, and I couldn't catch my breath to utter a single word, so I silently capitulated to the 45-degree misery. My travel mates regularly racked up 14ers in the Rockies. I think they'd started to figure out my lagging behind was only partly intentional. So halfway up, we convened on the side of the trail to put it to a vote. Continue to the summit or turn around and conserve our energy for the 4 to 5 other hikes on the itinerary for day 1. Although I could tell by the gleam in her eyes that finishing the hike would have been no sweat, Sarah kindly offered to stay back and keep me company. So while Faith and Tabitha raced up the mountain, Sarah and I settled against a promontory and feasted our eyes on the view. In one direction stretched the shimmering sea. In the other, straight-up pinnacles pronged the sky like giant stone fingers. We watched our friends become pinpricks against the mountainside. Nearby, a solitary sheep grazed. That brief respite was one of our few heart-to-hearts. We'd get 2 more fleeting conversations together, on Easter at sunrise and on the flight home. Both of them shared with the books Sarah was devouring in her momentary reprieve from her young and boisterous crowd of beloved interruptions. The rest of that morning and afternoon took us up and down the east coast of Skye, the sun reflecting off of mirror locks, razor switchbacks that took us up into the misty overlooks of Quirang, where we of course posed like the Fellowship of the Ring, border collies guarding a remote holy well, the fairy glade picnic among wildflowers, and a cliffside glimpse of Kilt Rock. Our final destination of the day was Brothers Point, famous for its prehistoric footprints. We'd timed it to arrive on the beach at low tide, the only time the rock slabs were accessible. Tides may have been the reason the fossils hadn't been publicized until 2015. Our hike from the parking lot was entirely downhill, but instead of thinking about the return trip, I concentrated on not slipping forward with my almost jelly legs. In one soggy spot, Sarah did slip, but bore the mud streak across her side like a sash of glory. Faith and Tabitha ran ahead for a picture of the iconic cliffs where castles once jutted. Sarah and I agreed to meet them back at the car. We wanted one last look at the sandstone ledge, pockmarked by what one scientist described as a dinosaur disco. We were happy to believe, or even pretend, the indents were made by dinosaur feet prancing across the beach in former eons. The water was creeping closer as the tide came in. Waves crashed over the slate, and sea spray slapped our faces. As we made our way down toward the slippery shelf, Sarah called out to a tall fellow on a similar quest. "Have you found any footprints?" Sarah asked. Indeed he had, over yonder. Did we fancy a look? We fell into step beside him and introduced ourselves. "I'm Dave," he grinned. "Is it a photo op you're after? I'll take you to it, but I won't tell you the exact spot so you can point and ask, 'Is this it, Dave?' in your delightful American accents." He told us he had come 8 whole hours from Birmingham on holiday. "And where have you come from?" Sarah asked him if he was familiar with the Midwest. Dave nodded. "I'd love to visit one day. Tell me, do you have tornadoes there?" We told him we did, but we were unprepared for what came next. I've dreamed of chasing a storm across the Midwest. At this, Sarah and I were speechless. Then, mid-reverie, our comic friend turned tragic. "But I've heard rooms book up fast this time of year." He shook his head regretfully. There, walking along the coast of Scotland on Good Friday, I considered the possibility that packed-out hotels, in Des Moines of all places, might prove the sole insurmountable obstacle to witnessing a twister carnivorize the Great Plains. By then, we'd climbed out to the tide pools dappling the shore. The cavities ranged in size, from dinner plates to truck tires, and our supposedly shared sorrows were forgotten in the face of the myriad puddles left behind by prehistoric creatures. Long ago, volcanic eruptions had spewed molten lava over a soft sandy beach. The layers cooled, hardened, and gradually eroded away to reveal the impressions preserved in the sandstone. My imagination leapt backward in time to call up visions of what may have been. Had this very beach once been the scene of a cavorting menagerie, a panic-stricken riot, or simply the accumulated goings and comings of watering hole visitors without the slightest notion of what might transpire? Such as 2 girls from Iowa, with respective accents, poking their hands and feet into the crevices and asking Dave if they'd found it.
Reagan Dregge, let's talk about Dave the Dinosaur Disco.
Okay.
This is a travel story.
Yes.
You went on that trip in part wanting to be a travel writer, so to speak, right?
Yes. My friend Sarah, she likes to go on trips. She loves planning them. She actually made like a 60-page itinerary with lots of details. And we went on to Scotland, to the Scottish Highlands, to the like remote places in Scotland for 6 days over Easter week.
So I want to talk for a minute about just this idea of how travel leads to story.
Okay.
It's by definition, you're getting out of what's familiar. You are opening yourself up to experience. Tell me about your connection to travel and storytelling.
I mean, I live in Minnesota, in the countryside, outside a small town, and Scotland is far away, but I had never been there before, so I didn't know what surprises lay in store. And it was really neat to see the connections when I was there that reminded me of home, actually. Those were my favorite parts of the trip, were things that reminded me of my own home, the tastes and the landscapes that just reminded me.
Yeah, well, I thought it was so interesting that somebody over there who sort of took their world for granted said, "I love your American accent," right?
Yeah.
And so there's something about that in travel, you are getting out of the familiar, and you are both. The old adage: there's only two kinds of stories: either a stranger comes to town or a person goes on a trip. And so you were the stranger who came to town for Dave.
Yes.
And you were, of course, the person who took the trip. And so, you're among people who you think this is exotic and exciting, and they think this is just, it is to them what, small town Minnesota is to you.
That's right. Yeah, and when you meet people, anyone, anywhere, but you get to see yourself from almost their perspective. I don't think of myself as having an American accent. So to be told that he wanted to hear more of it, he just wanted to get me to talk so that he could hear it. Yeah. Like, talk about anything.
Yeah, that's so good.
Sarah planned this particular spot that we went to go visit, this Brothers Point, where there were prehistoric footprints, because she knew I liked dinosaurs. So it ended up being one of the best places. Like, everyone else loved it too, because it was just such a cool location. It was not as touristy as some of the other ones. And you really had to climb out, onto these really slippery rocks that jutted out when the tide was down. So I thought that was really special and meaningful that she picked a place that I loved. I loved the dinosaur footprints, and then everybody else loved it too.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. It was so much fun to read.
Yes. Thanks for letting it be on the podcast.
Yeah. Rachael Watson has been all over the world. Sometimes she speaks the local language, and sometimes she doesn't. On a recent taxi ride in a country where Rachael didn't speak the language, the driver's kindness and generosity gave her reason to think about the relationship between hospitality and language. Here's Rachael Watson reading Where I'm From.
Where I'm from. If there's a graceful way to climb into a taxi while dodging scooters, I haven't found it. I dump my sweaty self into the back seat and smile at the driver in the front. He gives me a wave, catching my eye through the rearview mirror, and asks me something in his language. I hesitate. He asks again. I know it's a question based on his intonation and one word he speaks, but I have no idea what he's asking. I only speak English. I lift my hands in apology as he pulls his black car out into traffic. It's a lie. I would have answered the question if it was asked in 3, maybe 4 other languages, but that's also something I can't say. I could tell him hello in Serbian, tell him to take it easy in Swahili, or ask his name in Russian. Instead, I display an apologetic smile that's easy to interpret. His language is not like mine. My middle-aged mind is not as elastic as it used to be. It takes me time to learn, and we haven't lived here long. He bobs his head, speaking a sort of universal, "oh," that every language seems to have. Usually, this is where the conversation stops. I can't say more, in the taxi driver's language, and they can't continue in mine. We will smile at the journey's end, bowing our heads slightly towards each other as I open the door and leave. I won't remember their face, even though it's dear to those they love. They may go back and tell their family about the foreigner who only spoke English. I will go back and tell mine about the friendly driver who I couldn't communicate with. "Where are you from?" he asks in halting English as he swerves through hectic traffic. My face lights up the same way I've seen other people's faces brighten when I speak their language. He's the first taxi driver here to ask me that in English. Is that what they've all been saying every time I get in? "America!" I chirp, immediately regretting that I said it in English. America is a word I've already learned. This is how it goes. Even when you study a language and memorize phrases, you still forget words when speaking them outside a calm classroom environment. He honks his horn at another driver, smiles, and tells me how to say America in his language, lifting his finger like a conductor to emphasize each syllable. My voice follows the wag of his index finger. I'm not the best student, so we go back and forth a few more times as he corrects my pronunciation. He rolls through all the words he thinks I know. Yes, I say in his language. Yes. I repeat them all back to him, and we laugh at my limited vocabulary together before lapsing into comfortable silence. He merges onto the highway and relaxes into the driver's seat, humming along to the radio. I think it's their equivalent of a country music station. The music is all twang and soul. I want to ask him if he's from the city or a village. What about his parents? My mother grew up in the Colorado Rockies. We call her mountain stock. She settles into every home she's lived in with a large stack of chopped wood. I've watched her tough out harsh winters. I want to say, I used to think when I was a teenager that I was the stronger one in the arguments. And now I understand she let me win out of love, not weakness. My father grew up on the St. John River in Florida. Sailing is second nature to him. I wonder if his father is good like mine. My father's heart is all softness, no harshness. He keeps sanding down any hard edges as he grows older, always willing to change. Was it like that with his father? The taxi driver sneezes. It's spring, and allergies are dancing in the air. Tall trees are releasing wild yellow sheets of pollen into the wind. I want to ask if they eat local honey here to fight allergies like they do somewhere else I've lived. He weaves in and out of traffic as I do the same with my thoughts. I make a list of languages to learn where are you from in. I watch a woman on a bicycle waiting at a stoplight and think of how hard it is to leave home. Even the bicycles can look different. I think of brisket, the first meal I ate when we moved to East Texas back when I was 13. I haven't found a better brisket than Bodacious Barbecue in Longview, Texas, the original restaurant. I can still taste it. The dill pickles against smoky meat. I want to tell the taxi driver that's where I'm from, but that's a half-truth because I lived in New Mexico before then. I grew up with burritos for lunch and enchilada dinners for school fundraisers. I'm like that onion metaphor everyone uses. Another layer peels back the more times you ask me where I'm from. It's not only East Texas and New Mexico. I've spent my entire adult life falling in love with countries I've lived in. It doesn't take much for me to grow attached. A corner bakery shop, a playground for my children, a retired couple who walks the same route as me during the morning, a tree that reminds me of the one outside my grandparents' log cabin in the Colorado Rockies. We pull up to my house. The driver parks, turns towards me, and takes his phone out. Pulling up a translation app, he begins speaking into it. He's translating the automated message his taxi service always plays at the end of a ride. I know enough to piece together what he's doing. I lean forward, squinting to read the English translation coming up on the app. It's an honor to serve you, I say aloud as I read the words. He presses the read aloud function, and a female voice starts reiterating the message. It's an honor to serve you today. I smile and touch my hand to my chest, bowing slightly forward as I do. I make eye contact, not through the rearview mirror, but face to face. His face has creases everywhere from his big smile. I say a few words in his language. As I shut the door, we wave at each other through tinted windows. I think of all those in my home country who have left their world for mine. One day, when I've moved back home, I will learn a stranger's language well enough to ask where they're from. I will open translation apps. I will remember this taxi ride. I will remember where I'm from.
Rachael Watson, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. This story about, well, it's about language, but it's also about hospitality.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I was wondering why you didn't tell the nationality of the taxi driver or the language he was speaking.
Yeah, I guess it was a bit of an artistic choice. Sometimes when you say the nationality, then the reader kind of gets caught up in the country that you're speaking about, the people, in whatever type of perception they have. And I wanted this to be more about the taxi driver and his hospitality, my response to it. I wanted it to sort of have this universality to it too, because I've had similar experiences in different countries, and I assume others have as well. And so the other thing is I had just recently finished The Teacher of Nomadland.
Oh yeah.
By Daniel Harry. And
Yeah.
he had done that interesting decision not to have the characters speak in their languages, but there was a lot of different languages going on.
Yeah.
And so looking back, I had finished it a couple weeks before I began this prompt, and I wonder if there was a bit of like an influence of that.
Yeah, I love that scene in Teacher Nomadland where they're translating from one language to another, to another, to another, and then back. And it's funny, and and raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I was wondering how the message got garbled over the course of all that.
Yes. Yeah.
But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. But
Yeah.
I love that. I love that connection that you were reading Teacher of No Man's Land before you wrote this.
Yeah.
And you said you wrote this. You wrote this specifically in response to the prompt of a leaving home story on the habit.
Yes, I saw that you put that call out, and leaving home. Anything about that can kind of. It's not always, to be honest, inspiring.
Okay, fair enough.
Not inspiring, but it's something that is quite common for me since I move a lot, and and I don't know which move do you focus on, what's the story to tell, and all of that. But then I had this taxi ride the day before, and so I thought, I'm just going to sit down, and because it had moved me, it had been a very moving experience to me. The man's hospitality and how he invited me in. And so I thought, I'm just going to start there, and I'm going to see where it takes me.
So you wrote this the day after the taxi ride?
Yes.
I was picturing it being a long time ago.
No, it's quite recent.
Yeah. So you posted it. You got some feedback on the habit.
Yes.
forums.
Yeah. I got some feedback and some helpful, tips, and a little bit of discussion whether we should talk about, like you had asked, if keeping the language or the nationality, the place, whether that was a good choice or not. Anyway, or how to make it more clear for the readers as well. That was very helpful for me. So
yeah, good. And you had mentioned before we started recording that you had not written memoir before you got mixed up with the habit membership. I think of you as a fiction writer because you did the fiction cohort this past January, February.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I guess I think of myself as a fiction writer as well. Fiction, poetry. I've done maybe, I do remember for school, I had one assignment that was life writing, like creative memoir. And so I have written one piece before I joined the habit last August. And I think I hopped into you had a nonfiction workshop in the fall. And then, there's just been some times where I really enjoy the format and the habit of whenever you have these workshops that you offer. And so in those, I several of them have been nonfiction. So I just hop in because I find that I learn a lot and I like the community. And so, this year I've done more nonfiction than I thought I would.
Well, good. Well, Rachel, thanks so much. And your story made me want to be a little more hospitable my own self. So thanks.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
When college students go away on foreign study, they are exposed to new food, new languages, new experiences, new ways of being, all without their parents around. They can hardly help but grow up. But most of them don't grow up as much as they think they have, or in the ways they expected to. That was certainly the experience of our next reader. Besides being a writer of personal essays, Rachael Watson is the proprietor of a Substack called Library Binding, in which she interviews authors, many of them her colleagues from the Habit membership. Here's Rachael Watson reading Foreign Affairs.
Foreign Affairs by Rachael Watson. He was shorter than I expected, the Italian cousin. I'd been scanning pedestrians, searching for him, but I needn't have bothered. He found me, American girl, hard to miss. It was a muggy June afternoon in Florence, and my stomach swam as it always did when meeting someone new. He startled me by kissing both of my cheeks in greeting. He wasn't my cousin. He was my best friend's. Third, once removed, she wasn't sure. She'd never laid eyes on him. This was 2002, long before video chats or international messaging. Shortly after arriving in Italy, I'd called him on a public phone using one of those prepaid cards, and now he'd materialized in front of me on the sidewalk outside my hotel. He stood about as tall as my 5'5". He wore a collared shirt and khakis. Nice shoes, too. His black hair fell in curls around his ears, and I could see dimples in his cheeks through a dark stubble of beard. I'm not sure if it was his heart-shaped face or perfectly round cheekbones, but he had an elfin look about him. Mischievous, capricious, as if he were equally capable of cobbling shoes by moonlight or demanding my firstborn child. He'll do, I thought to myself. I wonder what he thought of me. Blonde, big smile, obese by European standards. I met my best friend's cousin less than a week after arriving in Florence for a summer semester abroad. I had scholarship money that I needed to use or lose, and a cost-defrayed trip to Italy was hard to pass up. I traveled with a cohort of students from my university, none of whom I knew. But my best friend had promised to put me in touch with her distant cousin, Giovanni, and knowing a local gave me a degree of prestige among my peers. This was my first trip to Europe, and my first time away from home for more than a couple of weeks. Most significantly, it was my first dabble with the anonymous independence of traveling with strangers. Who would I be? How would I act? I was 19 and nothing if not a nice girl. I went to church, respected my family, kept close friendships, and excelled in school. I didn't have a rebellious bone in my body. In fact, I vacillated about going to Italy at all. Without my mom's urging, I probably wouldn't have, especially after 9/11 happened, and my dad thought it best we dropped the whole scheme, but the money was dangling carrot-like, threatening to vanish, and my mom insisted I go. I was a nice girl, as I said, and niceness had worked out well for me. I avoided conflict and sailed relatively smooth waters. But here was a chance to be someone else. I didn't consciously understand what was happening inside of me at the time, but I toyed with the idea of casting aside the habitual self-discipline that had for so long kept me safe and agreeable, but also rather beige and buttoned up. What if, for once, I shook out my hair and showed some spirit? What if I had life experiences? I had no intention of doing drugs or drinking myself senseless or losing my virginity, but I cherished the notion of returning home a sophisticate. I'd still be me, just an elevated, traveled version. Giovanni spoke decent English, and he wasn't much older than me. I introduced him to my roommate, Flavia, and another good-natured student from our group named Raquel. A few days later, Giovanni called and asked if I wanted to hang out. Of course I did. I cradled my old-fashioned hotel telephone and flushed pink. I had a date with a cute Italian boy. I can't remember if we ate food or walked around, but at some point, Giovanni asked if I wanted to see Settignano, a neighborhood up the hill with nice views of the city. It's dark, I said. The lights are magnificent, he said in that low, liquid lilt. We drove into the hills in his remarkably tiny car and parked at a lonely outlook overhung with trees. The view was even better than promised. We chatted about surface topics. I don't remember much of what we said, but I do remember the moment he grasped my hand and held it to his racing heart. Part of me thought it was romantic. Another part, the sensible part, thought it ridiculous. I felt no spark, no mystical connection with him, but the scene was utterly enchanting. We were leaning against a stone wall, gazing at the iconic Florentine skyline, illuminated by a sprinkle of caramel lights, while the stars shone silver above us. The air hung warm and still like a bath. How many other Americans has he brought up here? I managed to think, even though his fingers were in my hair. Did I mention that he'd brought a bottle of wine? I'd only drunk a half cup, but I was too tangled in the charm of my surroundings to push him away, even when he covered my mouth with his. Partly flattered and partly confused, I shrugged off restraint and returned his advances. I wasn't in the habit of kissing men I barely knew, but it was turning out to be one of those life experiences, and I wasn't about to deny myself. Looking back, I see how foolishly I behaved. I'd been kissed once, maybe twice, before Giovanni performed the role of Romeo for me that night. 2 mouthfuls of Chianti had bested my judgment, and I had no idea of Giovanni's intentions, no verdict on his character. He could have done what he wanted with me and disappeared beneath the labyrinth of terracotta rooftops, never to be seen again. Maybe now, all these years later, I'm making too much of the potential dangers, but I confess at the time I saw no potential danger at all. An attractive rogue wanted to kiss me by moonlight. Where was the harm? In my bid for maturity, I proved myself the opposite. I rationalized and minimized it, but later, after a period of honest mental toil, I concluded that what happened on that hilltop was not love, nor was it particularly romantic. Opportunistic was the word I settled upon. I reached this conclusion begrudgingly because I had it in my head that a foreign affair would be a choice piece of worldly education. A couple of weeks later, I found myself stuffed in a taxi at midnight with Flavia, Raquel, and another girl from our program who was sloshed out of her mind. We found her wandering around a dance club, drunk as a skunk. We grabbed her, took her back to the hotel, and put her to bed. I remember wondering what would have happened if we hadn't noticed her, or if we'd simply left her to fend for herself. I marveled at how she put herself at the mercy of strangers in a foreign place. I'd never do something as foolish as that. At the time, I was too dense to realize I'd already done it. It will come as no surprise that I spent much of that summer sweeping my youth and inexperience under the rug. I wasn't wise in the ways of the world, but oh, how I longed to hide it. Flavia and I planned charming weekend excursions to the Cinque Terre and Siena. And they went so well, we thought we'd try a day trip to the hot springs in Saturnia. We missed our bus on the way back, and there we were, stranded on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere with nothing but tall, grassy thickets towering over us. It was 1,000 degrees, and we were hungry and out of water, but we started hoofing it back to town, hoping another bus would come along and take pity on us. No bus came, but Fabio did, in response to Raquel's outstretched thumb. His name actually was Fabio. He drove a convertible and reeked of cologne. "May I offer you a ride?" We didn't ask questions. We hopped into his car, not even trying to hide our sweaty desperation. This man was a total stranger. He could have driven us to a castello deep in the forest and chopped us into 1,000 pieces. But he didn't. He drove us to the train station and made cheerful, thickly accented conversation the whole way. He thought Flavio was cute. We foisted some euros on him for gas. It all worked out, but gosh, how brainless were we? But again, it was an experience. The summer was a dice roll of hits and misses. I bought impractical shoes and never picked up enough Italian to pass muster. I continued to casually mess around with Giovanni, knowing full well I was slipping coins into a bag with holes. I did gain a few practical skills. For example, I learned how to step into moving traffic to cross the street, at a crosswalk, mind you, but no Italian driver ever slowed for a crosswalk unless it contained a living body. Taking that first step off the curb, I was presenting myself a living sacrifice, praying for brake pedal grace. I learned that the only good pizza is the kind you have to eat with a knife and fork. I learned how to elbow my way through the cluster of customers hovering around the cash register at an alimentari and demand service, which was the only way to get it. I learned how to avoid pickpockets on public transport. I learned how to sit still on a garden bench and lift my eyes to the clouds. I read through the Decameron and memorized every famous painting and sculpture in the city. I ran my hands along medieval walls, climbed the narrow stone staircase of Giotto's Campanile, and listened to monks intoning ageless chants outside Fiesole Cathedral. These were experiences too. I'd hoped to return home in Cinderella fashion, like Sabrina Fairchild after Paris. But all of my many experiences didn't transform me into a woman of the world. My frailty and folly stood in stark contrast to the cosmopolitan image I tried to stilt up. Was it helpful, I wonder, that images of Christ confronted me at every turn? Michelangelo's sculptured saints, faith soaked into fresco by Fra Angelico, Ghiberti's gates of paradise, their golden gleam capturing the eye, and then presenting it with the humble truth of those ancient stories carved into each square frame. In a way, it was good to be mixed salad-like with the other students, most of them wholly unlike me and utterly unconvicted by the ubiquitous biblical imagery. The majority seemed to have no other goals than to drink wine and buy leather jackets. I stopped seeking their approval, but I continued to watch them through my eyelashes and make mental notes. I saw them fail, like the time they got busted for using one of the bidets, a clean one, I hope, as an ice cooler for booze. Where they got ice, I have no idea. But I also saw them shine, like when a guy tried to grab Raquel's wallet out of her back pocket at the laundromat. She slapped her billfold out of his hand and barked at him in Spanish until he ran away with his tail between his legs. I sponged everything, good and bad, processing it at mad speed, trying to separate the right from the wrong, the wholesome from the rotten. I didn't have my friends and family to consult. Instead, I began the painful process of cutting my own teeth of discernment, a phase of life that hasn't yet ended but continues to exist in various forms as I ripen like the grapes in those sun-soaked vineyards. If I'd lived hard by my convictions that summer, I might have been a good influence, shone the light like I'd been taught. Thankfully, I had other formative experiences away from home that coaxed that nobler conduct out of me and confirmed its rightness. Now I no longer strive for sophistication. Now I toil in the opposite direction, striving to beat back the jagged, jaded grumblings that nip at my adult heels. I find myself yearning to air out my crumpled sense of joy and coax the sputtering flame of spontaneity back into high dance. 3 years later, I returned to Florence, this time with my best friend, and we met Giovanni at the cafe where he was working. He still looked rather like a strapping elf, except he'd traded his clean-cut clothes for a gypsy getup. He wore a pink peasant blouse and white pants so flowing they could have been a skirt. He'd grown out his curls and pulled them into a bun, secured with a pair of chopsticks at the back of his head. A ratty assortment of bracelets encased his wrist. He kissed us on both of our cheeks and made us cappuccino on a noisy and disobedient machine. I felt bashful at first, but that melted as quickly as the foam on my coffee. The three of us agreed to meet the next day at Boboli Gardens. Giovanni arrived 2 hours late, and we'd almost given up on him. He'd become a spirit who moved with the wind, apparently. Was he trying on a persona that he would later shed? Or had he morphed into his authentic bohemian self? I lost touch with him, so I guess I'll never know. I gaze back at those carefree, careless days when I walked around in the prime of my youth, not realizing how strong and also how vulnerable I was. My body remembers the energy that coursed through me that summer when every new experience felt like a chancy experiment. Now, when I watch young people thunder across a green lawn or a parking lot or a beach, running for no other reason than they have bottled energy to burn, my heart, nearing halfway to its projected expiration, surges by proxy with that remembered mix of risk and vigor, still so intoxicating. That first summer in Italy, I didn't know that maturity was a long way off, that I wasn't living my best years. Those lay ahead. I proved myself a fool, mostly, but I no longer scoff at my younger self. I've learned to treat her memory with tenderness, I've fashioned her vanity and missteps into monuments of a time gone by, testaments to how profoundly a person can change for the better.
Rachael Watson, thank you so much for sharing this story with us. That was fun.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
As I was thinking about your story, I was reflecting on the fact that, in memoir, unless you're, it's distinct from, say, journaling, the writer and the person in the story, yeah, they're the same person, but there's always a gap. And that's kind of how this story works. There was young Michelle who thought about what she was doing one way, and current Michelle who thought about all that a different way.
Yes, definitely. I hadn't thought about the experience in so many years going on that study abroad trip. And so when I approached the prompt, I thought about it in an entirely new way. And when I looked back on my actions and, some of the foolish things that I stumbled into, and also, the things that I actually did learn and grow from, I was thinking about it from, all of this distance, and realizing that even though I didn't like a lot of those memories and wasn't real proud of a lot of the things that I did, I also understand that that's who I was at the time. And looking back on my former self with compassion and realizing that I was, that's where I truly was. And it was difficult to look back honestly. I found myself many times thinking, is this really how I was thinking about it? Or is that just how I'm thinking about it now and remembering it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to know. It's hard to answer that question. Well, I love you use the word compassion. I think that's one of the things that happens in memoir is you learn to be compassionate to that other person who was, making choices that you wouldn't make now. And it's so easy in our everyday life to think back on our younger self and say, what a dummy.
Yes.
And there's something about writing that invites compassion, even if it's compassion to your younger self or maybe your current self.
It's so true. And and I even did think about ways in which, I'm still not, at this point of perfect maturity where I can now look down on myself or, others and go, oh, now I've kind of reached it. And I think, what years from now am I going to look back at this point in my life and go, oh, I was still on that journey. I think we all still are. But it was really fun to look back at that time when I thought I was, pretty sophisticated and, I was going to be. I was looking for those experiences that were going to elevate me, and realizing that maturity was so far away, and and it helps me too to look at young people and go and really value them for what they're going through, and at that time in their life, and it helps me to be more compassionate to others, like you were saying, to young people that are going through like all of those volatile emotions. Remembering that time was really a wonderful experience. I said, probably never would have given that time of my life much thought if it hadn't been for this prompt.
Yeah, good. So since this is a hard-hitting interview podcast, I've got to ask you the question everybody wants to know. Did you come home from your study abroad with a fake Italian accent?
No.
Okay.
No. And even in the story I was like, I'm going to try very hard not to talk with any type of accent or, narrate with any type of accent because I'm not going to be able to do it.
Okay. Quick change of subject before we go. Tell me about Library Binding, your Substack.
Oh, yeah. So with Library Binding, I really enjoy interviewing authors. I've interviewed a lot of folks from The Habit. Everybody's been so incredibly kind and top-notch folks, wonderful experiences. I like to learn a little bit more about folks, where they're from, a little bit about their background, and then talk about the books that they're writing. I have never written a book, and I really admire folks that manage it. And so it's just in many ways a side hobby, but also something that I really, truly enjoy. And I like to incorporate visuals, so photos, graphics, things like that, because we're all.
It's really fun the way you, the way you incorporate the visual with the interviews, and it's always fun to see, when library binding comes out, how often I'm saying, I know that person. That's a habitué.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being here. This is fun. Loved your story, and thanks for talking for a minute.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It was a pleasure.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit Membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.